Ole Miss star quarterback Jaxson Dart. Is he worth a first-round pick? He has all the tools and traits, and Keith is going to tell us about that and more coming up next.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Locked On family? Welcome back to the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, your daily podcast covering your favorite draft prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your boy, Damian Parson. You can find and follow me on X at DP_NFL. I am a senior draft analyst, and thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every day shot for being our everydayers. And you know I got to kick this intro to Mr. LSU himself, Keith Sanchez. You can find and follow him on X at TheTalentCode. Keep talking to him, baby.
What's up, Locked On family? Let's get locked in. This is Keith Sanchez, man, the other side to this dynamic duo that we like to call the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. Man, I want to start this podcast off by saying shout out to our everydayers. Thank you for tapping in with us each and every single day. DP, the Scouting Notebook. Yes, we are going back at it once again, and we have some more intriguing names, right? Names that I will say that are versatile in their scouting grades, right? Some people have them really high, some people have them in the middle. Man, we're going to start this thing off with Ole Miss quarterback Jaxson Dart, a guy that I evaluated. Then we're going to the trenches, back to those national champs, man. Mr. Kenneth Grant, interior defensive lineman. Then we're going to wrap this thing up with Cade Klubnik. How does he bounce back? This is his first draft eligible year, DP, I believe. So we're gonna get into that conversation and see if he can throw his name in the mix. But before we get started, DP, why don't you hit him with our title sponsor?
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Jaxson Dart, guys, listed for Ole Miss quarterback, listed at 6'2", 220, started his career. I believe, Keith, if I remember correctly, he started his career at USC right before Caleb came in. And when Caleb and Lincoln Riley was making that transition to transfer over, he left and went and joined Ole Miss, where he's been the starting quarterback the last 2 years. And we look at it from a statistical standpoint before you get into some of your draft notes and what you saw from him on film. Statistically, 65% completion percentage in 2023, 3,364 passing yards, and 31 total touchdowns, because he does give you some of that dual threat ability as a runner and a passer, Keith. But overall, what did you see from Jaxson Dart, the good and some of the concerns on film?
Yeah, so if you're purely looking at a quarterback and you're grading him and evaluating him on how he throws the football, right? You're gonna like Jaxson Dart, meaning that there is velocity there. He has a strong arm. He can throw a touch at times. That like he can fit it in tight windows at times. So if you're looking just purely arm strength and you're talking about t-shirts and shorts, right, and just going out there ripping the football, he has enough physical tools and traits to be an NFL starter. And he looks like an NFL quarterback just naturally throwing the football. With DP, we had to turn the page, right? Because we always talk about this with quarterbacks. And I'm a huge guy on the fact that playing quarterback, while the tools, they're necessary, they're not the entire picture, right? As far as, arm strength and things like that. I'm huge on mental processing. And people say, okay, what does that mean? It's just simply getting through your progressions, first of all, right? And then the other part is this, that I need you to look comfortable in uncomfortable situations. I need you to appear that you always have an answer, because we know more times than not, DP, in the NFL, things are going to go wrong, right? And we need those quarterbacks that can make the wrong things right. That's half the battle in the NFL. That's half the battle playing quarterback. And so what I seen with the flip side of what Jaxson Dart offers as a talent, right? The other side is this, that you look at some of the games, and I'll pull up a couple of the games, DP. Alabama game, right? 0 touchdowns, 1 interception. The Georgia game, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception, right? Auburn, right? 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Arkansas, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions. And so I'm going to name off some other games, and you watch this, the ebbs and flows of it. They have the LSU game, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Mercer, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. ULM, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And so Penn State, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And what I'm trying to say is, if you notice, there's not really a middle ground, right? There is almost a good Jaxson Dart, and there's almost, I don't say bad Jaxson Dart, but questionable Jaxson Dart, right? Concerning Jaxson Dart. And you start to probably look at what's the root of that. And the question is it a good game plan and scheme walking in versus a bad game plan and scheme, right? Is it the wide receiver's ability to get open at, against those opponents versus not being able to get open? And so that's some of the questions that's going to happen. Now, we've seen the lane train, right, operate in Ole Miss for quite a few years. We've seen Matt Corral, and in comparison, I think he's talented. I think he's more talented than Matt Corral. Like, I think he's more physically gifted than what Matt Corral was. I was not a big Matt Corral guy, but he's more physically talented than what Matt Corral was. Looking at him, DP, he's going to have to learn to get comfortable fitting the ball in tight windows. He's going to have to learn to see a defender running right next to his wide receiver and understanding, oh, I'm going to just put this on his back shoulder. Oh, I'm going to drop it in the bucket. Oh, here's a tight window, or I'm going to be an anticipatory thrower like a Brock Purdy, right? And I could throw this against zone and throw it 2 windows early. He's going to have to do those type of things. And you wonder, in this Lane Kiffin offense, does this kind of work against the quarterback a little bit, because he does a really good job of scheming things wide open, that as a quarterback, visually, you're used to seeing things wide open, right? And so that's kind of going to be the question for Jaxson Dart.
No, I think you broke that down very well, Keith. I think the main thing with him, being 6'2", 220, when I've watched him, I was like, okay, like the arm talent, I like the physical ability, the physical tools, like you said. Just it's almost like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, where it's like, I don't know which one I'm going to get from a day-to-day standpoint, right? Like, you might wake up and be like Baker Mayfield and wake up feeling dangerous and make some great plays. Then you might wake up and say, man, you know what? I'm going to throw 3 interceptions today. It's like, we need you to be more consistent game to game. And not only just that, when you were going through those games, Keith, and I think, we talked about it before, going through the season, like picking him in those big moments, those big games, the Bamas, the Georgias, whatever.
Yep.
Like, those are the games you need to step up in and not throw 2-3 interceptions. We need 3 touchdowns. If you lose and your team lose, mainly if the loss is because the defense gave up 45 points, but you put up 42, as a draft from a draft standpoint, I don't really care about the wins and the L's part of it. I care about how you perform in those moments and against those teams, right? When you said LSU, ULM, and all these other schools, Penn State, and these other schools, I'm like, all right, you know what it tells me? Those other schools, those teams, either LSU had a high octane offense, but the defense wasn't, carrying their weight, right? ULM, that speaks for itself. Penn State had a really inadequate offense. It was inconsistent. Defense had some players, but still, if your offense not helping you, don't really matter what your defense is doing, right? Like, so, but then you talk about Bama, Georgia, like Bama and Georgia and different stuff like that. And it's like, man, in these big moments, like, yeah, Jaxson, I need you to be the guy. I need you to step up and play well. I don't care if you win or lose. Just don't go out there and as they say, wet the bed of sorts. Don't give me 0 touchdowns and 3 interceptions against Bama. And in the SEC, with now Texas and Oklahoma, the SEC is bigger than ever now. You got to be able to hold your own, because it's not you're not just going to get the nod of, well, you're playing in the SEC. No, you got to go out there and beat other teams who are going to get the same love from the committee as an SEC team coming into the season. You got to knock off Oklahoma and Texas.
Yeah, I agree. And then they lost running back, right? Quinshawn Judkins. They're going to have they got the transfer Logan Diggs from LSU, which should be a solid back. I don't know if he's on the exact par of Quinshawn Judkins. So let me say I don't think so at this moment. But I think he is a good football player at the end of the day. But they brought in some defensive pieces, DP, and I wonder if they realized that in those games when Jaxson doesn't potentially have it, we're going to have our defense keep us in the game. And then maybe Jaxson can pull out a play late, right? But the defense is going to have to keep us around. We talked about Big Walter Nolan coming in. We talked about Princely Human Mealing coming in. So just boosting that defensive front.
Keith, not to get you off. It's mainly and I like that point. It's like trying to stop him from being Superman. Like, I don't need you to be the greatest of all time out here. Like, we want you to play complementary to the defense and everything else. I want to ask you. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, it's almost like they're trying to give him the opportunity to buy time to where if you don't figure it out in the first half, maybe midway through the third quarter, you can start to figure it out and then just make 1 or 2 plays down the stretch. Because this is the thing, and I guess I give him credit for it in a weird type of sense. He didn't throw a lot of interceptions, DP. He only has what, 5 interceptions on the entire year, right? And even against Bama and Georgia, it was no touchdowns and 1 interception. But it's just a matter of, I think, keeping him in the game, and doing certain things with him like that. So obviously, I gave him a 4th round grade at the moment with the opportunity to elevate, because I do think there are developmental traits there. It's just getting those high level moments, and maybe some people have him as a 3rd round, right? And feel like, hey, it's a quarterback, we can elevate him and take him in the 3rd. Maybe some people feel comfortable with the traits to take him in the 2nd. That's just where I fall with him right now. I think he's a talented guy, but I wouldn't, if you ask me the 1st round part, that'd be really difficult to convince me, because that's my game changers and that's the guys that I believe in the upside for him as quarterbacks. But DP, let's keep this thing going, man. We're going from quarterbacks to the guys that sack the quarterbacks. Interior defensive lineman from Michigan, Mr. Kenneth Grant. I'm excited to hear you talk about this big boy up front. So let's get into this conversation coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Guys, the NBA Finals are underway, and how cool and how exciting and how fun would it be to be able to go and see a game live in person and enjoy that experience? Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Guys, the Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics are still battling it out for the NBA championship. So while the series is still going, why not go check out Game Time and see if you can get tickets for the game Game 4, which is still going to be in Dallas. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Michigan's interior defensive lineman Kenneth Grant, listed at 6'3", 340 pounds on the season. He was a backup last year behind Chris Jenkins and Mason Graham, but when he was on the field, he made an impact, right? Statistically, only 16 tackles, but he had 28 pressures and he had 3.5 sacks. He also had an interception and a fumble forced on the season. And when talking about the pros, what do you like about him? He's a really good, explosive, vertical, linear athlete. You're talking about getting upfield in a hurry, putting that pressure on the quarterback. What's the quickest way to get to the quarterback? Up the middle in their face, and he brings that type of ability on a consistent basis. I think he has three down defender potential in terms of being able to handle the run game, zone runs, gap runs. He's really good at the point of attack for the most part, but also the lateral agility, going back to the zone run part. When teams want to run that stretch, and typically against a big boy like that, that's what you want to do, is you want to get them on the move instead of letting them be kind of that wall. You want to make them move laterally and see if they can keep their feet underneath them. Can they stay balanced? And he does all of those things. You see the quickness off the snap. And when he identifies the type of run concept to slice between blocks, get into the backfield, quick penetration, quick pressure. He has multiple pass rush moves, the push-pull technique, double hand swipes, long arm over, bull rush. He even has an inside spin as a counter after his first move has been stalled, right? He's a good gap exchanger in terms of twists and stunts, in terms of understanding how to use the tempo and patience of it. And then you see that quick closing burst, that good closing burst. And then with his hands, I really appreciate the fact that he's good at dislodging and disconnecting the offensive lineman's hands and their punches. He doesn't consistently let those guys get their hands latched into his jersey, especially in pass protection or on pass rush reps. He can consistently get into the backfield, Keith. Like I said, lateral agility, quick burst upfield, closing speed as well. And he has a really, really high motor. Now, when you're talking about what does some of the things that concern you, he kind of has some jack in the box type of reps where he's popping straight up out of his stance, right? Immediately standing straight up, tall, high shoulder, pad level is inconsistent. He doesn't get bullied off the ball in any way, shape, or form, but he can get pushed off the ball a little bit, and I think that goes back to the leverage and staying low and driving off the snaps rather than popping up, chest out, shoulders up. And then the main thing for me, and it's always going to come back to this, right? What did Jordan? We talk about this a lot. What did we learn from previous draft picks, right? Talk about what did we learn from Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis. What did we learn from Jordan Davis? We learned from Jordan Davis is that you have to factor in weight, build, and stamina. You got to factor that stuff in. How many snaps can you play? Well, he only averaged 27 snaps a game last year, not because of his stamina per se, but because he was the backup. Now with Chris Jenkins into the NFL, he's going to be the starter alongside Mason Graham. Can that motor, that energy, at 340 pounds, can he keep that energy going for 4 full quarters as the main starter alongside Mason Graham? Because if he can, this is a guy that could absolutely hear his name in the first round because he's got game-changing ability as a big, quick-footed, athletic interior defensive lineman that can really get after the passer. In the passing league, Keith, we've seen the importance of guys like Chris Jones, of Aaron Donald, right? Like all these guys, the Grady Jarrett's, Jeffrey Simmons. If you got an interior defensive lineman that can go one-on-one and quickly win and get in the backfield, that type of importance can never be understated.
Yeah, so DP, I'm looking at it, and the crazy part is with him, he actually popped for me before Mason Graham did. I remember watching this kid, and I forgot which game it was last year. It was just, Saturday they were playing. I'm like, who is this big boy that's just constantly making plays for Michigan? And I was like, okay, and I'll get back to it and stuff like that. And then Mason Graham arrived, and then I heard Mason Graham become the bigger name. I haven't went in depth with either guy, but hearing Kenneth Grant and you talk highly of him, I'm like, okay, I know I wasn't tripping because I know everybody's talking about Mason Graham, but I feel like this guy was pretty doggone good too in his own rights. And DP, I agree. Just like we talked about LSU potentially having 2 first-round offensive tackles, Michigan could potentially have 2 first-round interior defensive linemen. So that's a very fun conversation. And I want to kind of hit on your point too. We in the scouting notebook, and it's fun just to have these conversations. You talked about the weight, right? And not even categorizing him with the weight, because at this point we don't know. We know how much he weighs, but we don't know what his habits are. And I think that's the most important part. Because you can have big boys, but big boys that eat right? That work out consistently, that are committed to the game, that are committed to being the best version of themselves. So I think that's going to kind of be an important part. Because you said you will factor that in moving on, right? Maybe you didn't factor it in as much with Jordan Davis. We'll factor it in now. And like, okay, what are your habits? And I think that's the part with big interior defensive linemen that you almost have to pay attention to. And it's just a mindset, right? Because you can tell, like you said, some of those big guys, as even though there's 300 plus pounds, they still work on their endurance, right? Their cardio and things like that, and understand being in shape. And then some of those big boys, they just kind of like, hey, it is what it is, right? I've been big my whole life. It's kind of going to be what it's going to be. So think it's going to be a fun conversation just to talk about the tandem. And I have one question before we transition. Does he have the opportunity to be better than Mason Graham?
I think so. I look at, and I'm watching both of them. And like you said, Kenneth Grant, and I remember the game where he really popped to me. You probably remember this when I say it. It was a Penn State game when he ran down Nicholas Singleton, the running back, down the line.
That's probably what it was. I was like, who is this big boy? I'm like, I have no idea. And then, like I said, I knew him, and I'm like, Michigan got a really good young guy. And then everybody started talking about it, and I'm like, that's not the guy I was talking about.
It was like the playoffs when Mason Graham took off, and he was starting the whole season alongside Chris Jenkins for the most part. But he had a really good postseason where you start to see that impact. But even Kenneth Grant, when he was in the game against Washington, he literally pushed his bull rush one of the Washington guards or a center into the ground as he was right in the face of Michael Penix, on a big time, I think it was like a 3rd down play. So for me, I do think he has the potential to be better than Mason Graham. I think Mason, like I said, he has all the momentum out coming off the postseason, but I think quickness, And hand quickness is so important. He is very good with his hands in terms of counters, striking, reducing hitting surfaces and stuff like that. I think he may be more nuanced as a puncher than Mason Graham is. And Mason Graham is still a good puncher. And I'm going to get more into his film and do the deep dive of him in the next day or so. But yeah, I think Kenneth Grant could be the better defensive tackle coming out.
Okay, cool. Hey, well, let's wrap this thing up, man, with somebody in your neck of the woods, DP, Mr. Cade Klubnik, right there with those Clemson Tigers, man. This is his first year being draft eligible, so we have to have the conversation about who is he as a quarterback. Is it a Clemson situation? Is it a Cade situation, man? We're gonna have that fun conversation coming up next.
Thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every day. Shout out for being our everydayers. Cade Klubnik, quarterback for those Clemson Tigers in my neck of the woods, listed at 6'2", 205 pounds. 2023 was his first full season as a starter. Everybody remembers the year before, 2022, they had DJU. All the fans wanted Cade Klubnik to play. Well, that has not turned out the way that they expected or the way that they desired, because Cade has been very inconsistent. And when you look at his stats, 63, almost basically 64% completion in 2023, 2,844 passing yards, only 23 total touchdowns. And looking at his game, the things that I really appreciate and like from him is the arm talent. He can spin it, Keith. Like, I'm not saying he doesn't have an elite arm, but he has a pretty good one. And and I remember watching him. I'm gonna tell you, and this is probably why he's played the way he's played. The name that came to mind was Matt Corral, where you saw the snappy, whippy arm motion, the arm angles. He's also a really good athlete. This young man has a track background. I think 4x4 and 400 meters. So in open field, he has the stride. He has the long speed to make you pay if he breaks contain and get out of the backfield, right? And when he's locked in and when he's on his game, he does show some accuracy, ball placement, and everything like that. But here's the drawback. Being a young player, and I'm not going to lie, Clemson's coaching staff put him in some very disadvantaged situations. I'll give you an example. Go back to Florida State. Game is in overtime, right? You coming off of Keon Coleman dunking on your young freshman corner to put them up in overtime. You, on 2nd and 10, you run the ball with Will Shipley. You get 3rd and 1 inside the 10. And they called a run pass option where he can either hand it to Will Shipley or throw the stack screen from a bunch set. Well, he didn't hand it to Will Shipley. He made the call and threw the screen. They lost 2 yards. Then the last play, 4th and 3, he ends up, getting pressured, throwing the ball away. Game's over, right? Against Miami, they told him to run the ball this time. He turns it into a QB zone read, and he pulls it out of Phil Maffa's out of the pocket from Phil Maffa, tries to outrun a linebacker with the game on the line, gets tackled, and loses the game. So the decision-making as a young player, also add on the fact that the coaching staff put him in some really tough positions, you started to see why he didn't play the way his talent was there. And like I said, decision-making was not great in terms of when you should let the ball rip, he didn't always let it rip. You saw some gun shyness. Then you saw him test windows he shouldn't test and throw it into double coverage, right? Turn down easy reads. And I always compare basketball and football. As a quarterback, taking those easy reads is like a player in the NBA getting that layup. It's just getting an easy bucket and getting their confidence going, getting your rhythm going. We've seen LeBron James, who's not a great three-point shooter, but when LeBron starts attacking and he gets into that rhythm, then you see them step backs, them side steps, and you see the three-point ball. Why? Because he's in a rhythm and he's confident. And I didn't see that a lot, even against like bad competition last year, Keith. I can't remember which game it was. It may have been, Charleston Southern. Early in that game, I think he threw like a pick 6. And I'm like, Cade, what are you doing? He holds on the ball too much. He's taking sacks. He's fumbling. He's not protecting the football. He has the talent to be a draftable quarterback in the first, I say in day 2 for sure. I mean, if he played great in elite ball, he could absolutely work his way in the first round. We've seen that. But the fact of the matter is the inconsistencies with decision-making, accuracy, protecting the football, Like, and they have talent. Look at Clemson has offensive talent at running back, at tight end, at wide receiver. And to be honest, he's the guy that is truly holding back some of their young weapons from taking leaps and being more known draft prospects.
I have a question from a draft perspective, and well, DJU did it. I was about to say not a lot of guys usually transfer out of Clemson. You know, Clemson has their own little weird situation that they have going on over there. But I want to ask you, is it a fixable situation with Clemson, or does he need to be in a totally different scheme?
I think the scheme is good, right? It's an air raid, so he gets to playing shotgun. They're going to run the ball, give you play action, RPO, stuff like that. It's more so like I don't think he trusts what he's seeing. I think the game is moving too fast for him.
So can I pause right there, because it almost goes to the seeing ghost conversation with Sam Darnold from a couple years ago. From that perspective, does he need a change of scenery, or do you think it's just simple like he has to break through it, like he's going to take those same things with him somewhere else?
If he's mentally tough to be able to take the lumps and grow from it, sure, stay at Clemson. But to your point, this might be a situation where mentally you might need to go to one of these Big Ten schools like Iowa, where the spotlight isn't as big and you can go and just play ball. Because when you're at Clemson, and especially with the spotlight transitioning, when people were saying DJU wasn't good, he was the reason Clemson wasn't making it to this and to that, into the playoffs, and now you step in and you probably play worse than he did. And it's like, that's tough. So I do think that maybe a change of scenery will be big for him in the spring game. He did the same stuff. I think he had an interception. He wasn't playing well. And then one of the young backups came in and he was lighting it up. And people was like, maybe he should be the starter. And there's already some fans clamoring for, I don't know how, I'm going to say this. I don't know how long the leash is going to be for Cade Klubnik in 2024. If you come out and, matter of fact, week 1, what do you have week 1? Georgia to start the season. That's not great. That is not great for Cade Klubnik.
That's not a confidence builder. That's not a confidence builder. You do not build your confidence with Georgia. That is crazy. You know, they might should have looked into to switching that up or something. You might have wanted to play a Mercer or a Charleston Southern. So you know, one of those schools. God,
that cupcake. Get your bearings first. Not get Georgia around.
Yeah. He just gonna have to take the haymaker, man, and then hopefully week 2 and week 3 is a little bit lighter for him. But you know, it's a team and it's a program where, especially with the 12-team playoff, right? Playoffs are expected. What they did last year, that is not the standard in Clemson. You're going to have everybody on the hot seat in there because Clemson was good for so long, and there's going to be different narratives that are going to be drawn up. So it's definitely a lot of pressure on him as a quarterback, as a draft prospect. DP, I think it's safe to say that we'll continue to watch it unfold, right? That's what we do at the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. We don't throw anybody away, right? Especially if you still have time to play, and you know you have eligibility, you're still playing college football. Our job is to evaluate the prospect as more relevant information comes out. But DP, that wraps up another episode, man, of the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. I want to say shout out to our everydayers. Thank you for tapping in with us each and every single day. I am Keith Sanchez. You can find me on X at The Talent Code. That right there is my guy, my co-host, Mr. 30 minutes away from Clemson himself, man, Damian Parson. You can find him on X at DP_NFL. And like we always like to say, man, y'all come talk to us because we like to talk back.
Go subscribe and follow for free on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts, to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. Thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every day. Shout out for being our everydayers. On tomorrow's episode, I'm going back to Michigan, Keith. I'm going to maybe tight end 1, Colston Loveland. I'm going to get into the tape and see what he actually brings to the table and why he might be at the top of the mountain looking down at everyone else. So come and join the conversation again tomorrow on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.